Hi everyone, sorry you couldn't make it to the actual presentation, but we're going to go ahead and record the first part of the presentation to give you a bit of a sense of what kinds of opportunities are available in social innovation and what opportunities exist while you're still in Cambridge to get the skills you need to take up these opportunities as you move into the workforce. I do have at the end some examples of actual practical programs that you can join. I'm also going to give them to Shell and Eleno as a handout, so you can have that in writing and figure out which programs you might like to go and become a part of. By way of context, my name is Tamzin Byrne. I work at Cambridge Social Ventures, which is part of the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation in the business school at the university. And we've been collaborating with Trinity Hall now for a little while on a program called the Trinity Hall Entrepreneurs Network, which is intended to help students and researchers and members of the Trinity Hall community find their pathways into entrepreneurship and innovation. And this talk is part of that program. I'm sure Shell and Eleno will send you more details about that afterwards. So we're going to cover some of these ideas. What is social innovation? What is social enterprise? I'm going to give you a few short examples of what a social enterprise is and what social enterprises are looking for when they hire interns and junior level staff. That's slightly different for larger NGOs and charities. So I'll give you a quick couple of notes about that as well. And then, as I said, I'll give you those examples of where you can get started. But first, I always think when I give a careers talk that it's useful just to describe my career, because it's almost, I found as an undergrad, almost impossible to imagine what working life looks like and how you transition into that. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I started with a science degree at the University of Melbourne. I didn't enjoy it very much. I wasn't very good at doing the science. I was much better at talking about the science. So I thought maybe I should get out of academia while I still could. So I worked in pubs for a few years, and that was actually a really, really important time for me. It taught me a lot about the world, how to engage with people, what my own interests were. It was my first experience of learning how businesses operate. I was trusted to count the tills. I was trusted with marketing, taught me about customer service, all sorts of really useful things. So if you end up after your degrees working in pubs or shops for a while, I think that is quite okay. And you can tell your parents I said that. Eventually, I went back and did a postgraduate degree in journalism at a program that was like deeply practical. So it was like really connected to like actual active newsrooms in my city, which was great. And alongside that, I got the opportunity to cut my teeth at SYN, which is a youth-run radio and TV network in Melbourne, broadcasting to an area like 5 times the size of Greater London and 5 million people. I still don't know how they let us have that broadcast license, but it was just like really like messy and complex and chaotic opportunity to just learn how organizations run, learn how to manage a team, learn how to manage a project, and to do all of that without the sort of purpose of getting a performance review or good grades at the end of it. It was just for our own intrinsic interest, and I really learned there how to motivate myself. With that and my degree, I got a job at the ABC, which is like the BBC but in Australia. This was my dream job. I worked towards it my whole life. Absolutely hated it. Didn't last very long, about a year. I was like, this is not the dream that I thought it was. I think that taught me that like dream jobs aren't really real. Like jobs are just jobs at the end of the day. So I jumped ship and went to work in professional communications and public relations, specializing in science. So I would help research teams speak about their work to a wide variety of stakeholders, using my skills in journalism, using my skills in customer management and client management to really help research teams share their work really widely. From that, I was tapped on the shoulder for an opportunity to work in Kenya, which was basically doing the same work, but in Kenya, talking about insects and malaria, public health, climate change, silkworm rearing, all sorts of stuff. I got to throw a party where we got to invite about a dozen ambassadors. That was quite fun. And again, this kind of social enterprise element came into it. So we were developing, for example, a social enterprise scheme where women in rural Kenya could learn how to rear bees and silkworms, who obviously have products that can be sold on an open market. They could access funding from a microfinance lender. They could access training and support from the institute that I worked at, And the intention was to create collectives of silk and honey makers in parts of Kenya, which really needed a bit of extra support. And that kind of taught me that business comes in anywhere, that those business skills that I'd learned working in pubs all that time ago suddenly became very useful when I was now in this context where I was telling women in rural Kenya how to look after their bees better and how to sell their bees and their honey to other people. So it just kind of made me think like, oh, hang on, this business idea that I always thought a bit oddly about is actually really important in all sorts of fields. On a whim, I came to Cambridge, joined a startup called Gene Advisor. It was a huge amount of fun. I learned a lot. We worked really hard for a year to launch the product. And then through no fault of anyone's, the business failed. And that was a really interesting process to watch and to learn that failing doesn't always mean that something bad has happened. And from that, I now support social enterprises here at Cambridge University. So I help run this program where we give business advice and support to a really wide range of people who have businesses that could make a social or environmental impact in the world. And I also sit on the board of a small social enterprise in Suffolk that's been going for about 10 years. So that was a bit of an indulgence, but I hope it just goes to show you that, like, it's not like I popped out of university fully formed and had this job. It was a journey, and every single one of the jobs I've had along the way has put me in a position where I can do the work I do now. And I think when you think about your own careers, that's really important. So what is social innovation? There is no clear definition, but we like what Phils and his colleagues wrote about in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is that social innovation is a novel solution to a social problem that's more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just than existing solutions, and for which the value created accrues primarily to society as a whole rather than private individuals. In my own master's degree, we spent a whole day unpicking that. It's not without its problems, but we think it's quite tidy. We think it encapsulates a lot of ideas. And if you'd like to read more about it, I've popped the link there. You should have access to the Stanford Social Innovation Review through the library. And I think it's important to note as well that social innovation happens everywhere, like literally everywhere. And I'm sure wherever you are living and working in the world right now, you would have seen that over the past year. I know lots of you like consulting. You can do social innovation in consulting. Accenture Development Partners is a branch of Accenture, which is one of the really big consulting firms. All of them, KPMG, Deloitte, EY, they all have social innovation teams within their larger corporate structures. Big business, Unilever, a couple of years ago, made a commitment that they were going to become a B Corp, which is a badge of socially responsible business that involves them interrogating their entire supply chain, looking at how they pay their workers across the world, looking at how they market their products, even looking at what sort of light bulbs they have in their offices. It's a really big commitment, and it's really exciting to see very, very large multinational businesses taking up that opportunity to demonstrate social commitment. Danone is also exploring becoming a B Corp. And on the sort of other end of it, you've got quite large organisations like the Co-op, which is the 5th or 6th biggest supermarket chain in the UK. They started as a social enterprise. They were one of the early social enterprises in this country, founded in response to some really dangerous practices in food manufacturing and supply. And they're still going strong. So wherever you look, there are opportunities to do good things in business. In law, there are organisations like Trust Law, which work to create new ways to use the law for social good, and to support all sorts of different organisations and companies to embed social innovation legally in their work. And there's obviously also opportunities to do pro bono work at most big law firms. Even oil companies can be social innovators. BP and Shell have invested quite a lot in clean technology. You could argue that's just a response to a market need for more clean technology. I like to think that somewhere at a board meeting, someone said, you know what, this is probably the right thing to do as well. But the point of my story is that you can choose to spend your time and labor with a company whose values align with yours, wherever you work, whatever your field. And I think for the sorts of jobs with organisations like these that really major on social innovation, you need to develop an interest in that early and demonstrate your commitment to social innovation and entrepreneurialism throughout your career. Like, these are not necessarily jobs that you're going to land in tomorrow fully formed, as I was explaining when I was speaking about my own quilt of a career. Another very quick definition, we talk a lot about the third sector, which is a concept that basically comes from, if you think about like all of private business, all of the private sector is the first sector, and then you think of all the public sector, so like education, the NHS, government as the public sector, we call it the second sector. And then there's the third sector, which is charities, non-profits, NGOs, volunteer groups, social enterprises, and social ventures. It's an overlapping Venn diagram. Obviously, social enterprises are also private businesses, and many social enterprises sell to the public sector. So it's not as tidy as that, but these are common terms that you're likely to see as you explore careers in social innovation. And it's important to note that although my examples on the slide before were all about quite big organisations, they come in a range of sizes. Some are big, some are small, and everything in between. Like, for example, in the private sector, over half the turnover comes from small business. So like, small business and small organisations are a real opportunity for any graduate to look into. And when we think about what is a social enterprise or what is a social venture, there are sort of three elements that we look at. I'm going to give you some like concrete examples in a moment to help you understand what this is. But we're looking for something which is a financially sustainable business. So it's not driven by donations or grants. It's not a charity. It's something that makes its own money, that sells something. It has to be socially motivated. So it has to intend to do good things in the world. And it also has to have demonstrable social impact. So it has to have a commitment to measuring and assessing its social impact and improving on that as a result. So some quick examples for you. This is the most delicious example. This is Harry Specter's. That's Mona, Shaz, and their son Ash, who make chocolate. And the social mission here is that all the chocolate and all the employees are young people with autism. And this isn't some sort of pity project. This is because Mona realised that her own son Ash, who is a person with autism, he really enjoyed making chocolate and he was actually quite good at it. So they would do this together as a hobby, and it's very creative, it's very process driven. And she was really worried that when he finished school that he would struggle to find employment. So she thought she would create an opportunity for Ash and for other young people like Ash. They make great quality chocolate, like award-winning, very expensive, posh chocolate. So you can imagine in a different world, some people getting together in their kitchen to make some chocolate for charity might be a bit rubbish. You might be like, I don't want to buy some charity chocolate. But this is actually foremost award-winning, expensive chocolate that they sell to posh hotels in London. And secondarily, this opportunity to create employment for young people with autism. This company is in Norwich. They're called Prison Voicemail, and they are two guys who'd invented a bit of tech that made voicemail more secure. And they thought, well, in the modern world, who uses voicemail? And I imagine as a group of students listening, chances of you having voicemail activated on your phone are slim to none. So they thought about what contexts might actually benefit from secure voicemail. And they did some research and they realized that prisons actually have this really difficult problem where, if you've ever watched Orange is the New Black, there's queues at the payphones, the phones are expensive. If you're not at the phone at the right moment, you might miss the opportunity to connect with your loved ones on the outside. So they developed this app where the family on the outside have a phone with an app like the one in the picture, and the people on the inside have a special number that they can call to leave a message on the app for their friends and family outside. And their friends and family can also record like a voice memo, and then the prisoner can dial a special number and listen to the voicemail. So it means that you can have this like asynchronous way of communicating. And it's really important for the mental health of prisoners, which we know affects their likelihood to reoffend on leaving prison. And it's just like such amazing stories. Like there was this guy who'd gone to prison for a short sentence, but he'd only just started teaching his son how to play the guitar. And so as a way of like maintaining that relationship while he was in jail, his son would practice the guitar and record a message and leave it for him on the app. And then he realized, he would pick up the message and that's lovely. But then when he was feeling angry or upset, or when something bad had happened in the prison, he'd go and he'd listen to the message again and remind himself that his son needed him to stay well, stay out of trouble, and just, serve out his sentence. So it's had all these like really incredible social impacts that I don't think Kieran and Alex, who invented the service, could have imagined when they began. I think this is also a really interesting example because they didn't start with prisons. They didn't think, oh, how can we solve this problem in prisons? They started with a bit of tech and they looked for a way to use that tech that could help the world. And my third example, 11 sources. So that's Estelle there in the small picture at the UM, I think. But basically, this is a consultancy that is focused on helping large organizations understand the ramifications of their choices in mining and resources extraction. So, and they're also sort of supporting the interests of small scale and artisanal miners, which are often in poor parts of the world where workers' rights are not as well enshrined as they might be in the UK. She's worked with people all over the world to establish the standard, the international standard for fair traded gold. She also has worked on individual projects with landowners and with mining companies to help them understand the different contexts that everyone's working in and ensure that the minerals that we all have in our phones and the jewels that we might wear were produced in an environmentally and socially sustainable way. So those are just 3 examples. There are dozens more examples on our website, and I'll send the link through with this recording to Shell and Oleno. But from your perspective, like this is all sort of a bit pie in the sky. And in the next part of the talk, I want to give you some examples of what it's actually like to work with a social startup, what it's actually like to work with an NGO, and what sort of skills and experiences they might be looking for that you might be able to build up while you're still studying or in the early part of your career. So, what's it like? I can show you what it's not like. This is what it's not like. We don't sit around on beanbags drinking beer and eating pizza under our desks. This is not like the Silicon Valley startups that you might have seen on telly. It's so not like that at all. Although my office does have a lot of exposed pipes and is literally falling down, although I'm at home at the moment. This is more like what it's like. We're just normal people. We bring our whole selves to work. We bring our babies and our dogs. It's just very normal. It's just anyone can start a business. There's something like 6 million small businesses in the UK, and a significant proportion of those are socially motivated. But I guess it's like, we often don't wear suits to work. We often sort of hang out in small meetings in dodgy meeting rooms that we've borrowed for free off somebody else. It's not very glitzy or glamorous, that's for sure. But it is fun, and these people they're all extraordinary, and I'm so glad to have them in my life. You will find if you do any internships or take a job with a small early stage social startup, it'll be very small, it'll be very busy. They're continuously juggling lots of different challenges. So, for example, in a large organization, you might have like a marketing department or a finance department. In a small startup, it's probably one person doing everything. You would be expected to work quite independently, and there'll be a lot less structure than you might see in a more corporate internship. So you're more likely on the first day to, find your own space to work, bring your own computer, things like that. It's not necessarily as formalized as a corporate internship or work experience might be. You need to bring useful skills with you. There's not likely to be very much training. And again, this is quite different than what you might expect in a corporate internship. So it's much more useful to a social enterprise if you can say, okay, I managed social media for my boat club or for my sports club or for my art committee or whatever it was. So I can bring that skill and I can help you figure out how to do social media for your small business. But at the same time, you've got to be really honest about how much time and what skills you bring. So what you don't want is for them to say, oh, okay, we really want someone who can manage our bookkeeping and accounting. And you say, I've got an economics degree. I could probably do that. Yeah, cool. I'll give it a go. You really need to be honest and say, look, I've never done accounting before. I'm very happy to try. Is there anyone you could introduce me to who might be able to show me the basics? That's honesty, and that sort of honesty, but also a very proactive way of finding a solution to the problem of not having the right skills is exactly the kind of attitude that small social enterprises are looking for when they choose the sorts of students that they might work with. If we think about larger organizations, so I'm talking about here like bigger charities, bigger NGOs, bigger social enterprises, mostly the same. You might find a bit more structure or a more clearly defined role, but you still need to be proactive, flexible, and independent in your approach to work. The internships and junior work experience might have more structure, but it might not. And you'll really only know once you meet the people you might be working with in an interview scenario. The internships tend to be unpaid. I'm a firm believer that we should pay interns. I think it's a crying shame that we don't. But the norm in the charity sector and in the third sector, because they're so often sort of deeply focused on the social mission, is that interns are unpaid. Luckily, at Trinity Hall and in the university more widely, there are loads of places you can go to get small grants and bursaries that might support you to take up an internship. And I'm sure that Shell and Eleno will share some of those details with this recording. Internships and organisations like this tend to favour people with a track record of volunteering or social leadership, or even a few years of work experience. So I speak to a lot of students who have, degrees in politics or international development or, engineering, and they're very disappointed not to have the opportunities to use what they've learned in the classroom in an internship. But the reality is that as an NGO or a charity, I am much, much, much more likely to hire like an English graduate who did social media for their sports club over someone who has a degree in international relations but never did anything outside of the classroom. It's so critical in this sector to demonstrate these proactive, flexible, independent attitudes through your track record of volunteering and internships. And I know this is like often quite frustrating for students to hear, but luckily at Cambridge there are like dozens and hundreds of opportunities for you to get real practical experience. You don't need to have like a job. You just need to show that you've done something. I would also encourage you to consider picking something and like building a set of skills within that space rather than jumping from one thing to another. So I would probably be more likely to hire a student who had joined, I keep talking about rowing, it's because I'm a rower, but maybe they joined their boat club in first year. In second year, they were captain of their team. And in third year, they were alumni officer for the boat club, something like that. So it's a progression within one thing rather than someone who participated in this, participated in that, because it's quite surface level. So if you can pick one thing and grow within it, I definitely encourage you to consider doing that rather than hopping around doing 1,000,001 different things. And in this space, there's lots of opportunity for people with practical skills or a degree with a practical focus. For example, in my own context, I have a degree in science, which I would say is a generalist degree. And then I have a postgraduate qualification in journalism, which is a highly practically focused degree. Some friends of mine who I worked with in Kenya, their first degree was in engineering, civil engineering, highly practical. Their postgraduate qualification was in international relations, which I would call a generalist degree. So you kind of need to bring a mix of skills, but having something practical behind you is going to make you much more attractive to an NGO or a large charity than two very generalist degrees, for sure. So how do you build the skills for jobs like these? This is the $1,000,000 question, really, because it is difficult, particularly during the pandemic, for you guys to find opportunities to develop the real practical skills and proof of commitment that you need to be a strong candidate for work experience in the social sector and in the third sector. Luckily, there's loads of stuff going on that you can get involved in, and they are all operating during lockdown. So the opportunities are there, I promise you. So here in Cambridge, you've got Cambridge Hub, which is part of a national charity called Student Hubs. They run a range of different programs. They have internships that you can apply for the summer. So they source internships from small charities and small social enterprises in Cambridge and make them available through an application process to you. They also run programs for you to develop your own social impact ideas, and they run programs particularly for postdocs and PhD students, which is focused on building your own capacity as an innovator and building your own understanding of social impact. So they run some really cool programs there. Enactus, again, this is the local branch of a national organisation. They've just relaunched in Cambridge this year, and I'm the university advisor. I've been really impressed by what they've achieved. This is a scheme that is intended to help students create and lead small social enterprises. So the Cambridge team has developed 2 social enterprises this year. One is focused on addressing loneliness in older people, and one is focused on digital inclusion in education, particularly for young children. And they do that through a series of competitions that they participate in together as a team with other teams from across the country. They also have workshops and training through the year delivered by people like me and friends and colleagues of mine. And they have a small committee of students whose job it is to steer the whole ship through into the next year. I know they're recruiting at the moment, and I would definitely recommend having a look at Enactus if you are interested in social innovation. If your space is more international development, the Centre for Global Equality is really cool. So they run a range of different programs, from helping researchers test their interventions in the Global South to an annual conference that is led by students, where you get to hear from interesting speakers who have done work and who've led projects in poor and remote parts of the world. And they have a cultivator, which is kind of like a business support program, but also for like charities and social impact stuff that could have a positive effect on the lives of the poorest 1 billion people in the world. So they're quite cool and very open to students. And iTeams, so there's 3 strands to iTeams. 2 are focused on tech, and 1 is focused on development and social purpose. But this is a highly structured program that runs for 1 academic term, where you get put in a team with other students from across the university, and you're given a challenge, which might be, to use a real example, some postdocs had come up with a new type of light, and they wanted to look into ways that this light could be used to support other people in poor parts of the world. And so they got a team of students to look at potential applications of a very small solar-powered light, and the students proposed that this might be useful in refugee camps. And they came up with a sort of proposal for how this light could be developed into a product that could be useful in that context. There's loads of support around it. It's a really well-structured program. So that's great if you are not the sort of person that just wants to kind of like roll in and get your hands dirty like you might at Enactus. But in general, aside from the sort of formalized programs that you can join, I would just encourage you to take every opportunity you can to develop practical skills, whether that's understanding how finance and accounting works by having a look at your college accounts and participating in your JCR or your MCR, taking the opportunity to do social media for a sports club, or taking the opportunity to participate in some of the projects that you might be able to access through these programs. I'd strongly encourage you to volunteer in your community where you can. And volunteering looks different for everyone. I understand that a Cambridge workload is really high, but there's loads of opportunities to commit an hour a week, 2 hours a week, right through to 10 or 20 hours a week. You can find the sorts of opportunities that work for you. Speaking as someone who's done hiring in the third sector, I probably wouldn't hire someone who couldn't demonstrate a history of volunteering, or a history of working on socially impactful projects in their own time, whether that's through their work or through their coursework or as a volunteer is kind of up to you. But you definitely need to be able to show a track record of taking an interest and participating in social impact. And I think, harkening back to the start of the talk, sometimes you just have to be patient. There's a real chance that the job you want in social innovation or social enterprise will not be your first job, but that's okay because you can work towards it. So for me, for example, I faffed around in pubs for a while, but then my first real professional job was working in this communications agency for science. It was interesting work. I learned a lot there, but it wasn't what I was passionate about. But it did give me the launch pad and the practical skills and the professional experience that I then needed to go and get the job that I did want in international development. So if your goal is international development, third sector, charities, NGOs, that kind of space, consider what sorts of skills you might like to develop that will help you work towards that goal, and consider those for your first job after school or after university, because it might feel like you failed to reach your target, but actually I would suggest that you see it as a stepping stone towards the career that you do want. I'm going to send these slides to everyone. In these slides, I've made notes about each of these 4 organisations that we've just been speaking about, so you can have a look at those. If you have an idea of your own for a business that could create social or environmental impact, Cambridge Social Ventures can support you to do that. So we have Get Started with Your Social Enterprise, which is a half-day online workshop. We just cover the very, very basics that you need to make some of the early decisions about how your business might work, where you might get started, where you might look for further support. And we also have an incubator program, which is a year-long program of business advice and training. It's not intended for students. It's intended for people who are probably already working full-time on their venture. But if your goal is to set up a venture of your own or a social enterprise of your own, I really suggest coming along to that Get Started workshop as soon as you can to get a sense about like how your ideas might play out as a social enterprise. Go away, do a bit of work, find some teams, find a partner, develop a prototype, do whatever it is, and then after graduating, come back and apply for our incubator program. Or for those of you who are graduates who are already out there working in the world, come and apply for the incubator program now. That's totally cool. The next chance to join us won't be until the autumn though for the incubator. And both programs are open to any social enterprises, not just those working at the University of Cambridge. So you don't have to be a student or alumni. They're open to anyone who's working in the UK or whose professional base is the UK, even if their impact of their work is abroad. So bear that in mind. If you have any questions, here's where you can find me. I'm sure that my contact details will go out in the pack with the recording. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, and I hope you're all coping during lockdown. If there's anything we can do to help point you in the right direction to find support with your ideas, do drop me a note. And remember also that the college has this really cool network, the Trinity Hall Entrepreneurs Network, which can help connect you to mentors, professional opportunities, others who might have just had the sort of career that you aspire to have, who might be happy to have a chat with you about it. So really make use of those resources within the college. And the Cambridge Careers Service as well has a regular bulletin that they send out to students who have an interest in entrepreneurship and innovation, including social enterprise. So I would really recommend signing up with the Careers Service and ticking the box that says social sector and entrepreneurship, and then you'll get updates from that team as well. With that, I'm going to go and eat my lunch, and hopefully I'll hear from some of you.